Hello, it's Eddy Butler. This is the last of 3 talks I'm having with Martin here on the educational establishment in this country. Today we're going to be talking about the universities, a very important subject. So, universities is the pinnacle of our educational system. When I went to university, you went to university in the 80s, we both did. And when I went, speaking for myself, there were 5% of the people went to university, I think. There's probably a few more, probably another 5% went to the polys. And it was quite an elitist institution. Mm. And it was quite rare. People having a degree was quite a rare thing. Mm-hmm. And but now it's changed. Now it's more like 50%. The polytechnics have all become universities. A load of other technical colleges, or not technical colleges, a load of higher educational colleges became universities, and now roughly 50% of the people go there. What's your view of this change in university education?
All right. I mean, a little bit of history. I think in 1963 you had the Robbins report, and that report suggested a widening or a broadening of higher education. So a number of new universities were built to take on sort of broader swathes of the population. Then, of course, in the mid-70s, the mid-90s, the Labour Party introduced mass higher education. I think it was called widening participation. And so you had an extension of higher education institutions, and Tony Blair, I think it was, suggested that 50% of all students should go to university. And that was introduced for good intentions, really. He wanted to get more ethnic minorities into university. He wanted to get more people from working class backgrounds into university, and just give more people opportunities to benefit from a higher education. The problem with that is that if you have more, the quality of the degree begins to decline. It loses its currency. Because what's happening is that universities are taking in more and more students, because those students, as we've discussed before, represent funding. They get student loans and they get money from the government. The universities are keen to have them, because those universities want to stay in existence. And so what happens is the robust academic standards that we used to have, probably in your day, have disappeared. We have people going to universities now with grades E at A level. E.
And the value of an E...
The value of an E
would have been
a
total fail.
Absolutely, it would have been a foul before. And so what you've got is you've got universities who are desperate to get as many students as they can, because that represents income for them. And therefore, consequently, the standards have fallen. When I went to university, I had to have 3 A levels. I was required to have 3 Bs. Okay, fortunately, I was able to get those Bs. But today, students are going to university wholly ill-equipped academically to meet the challenges of the degrees, and that's why, Eddie, the degrees themselves have been dumbed down.
But your 3 Bs in A-level back in the day, I won't say when that day was, but back in that day, would be the equivalent of an A-star now, probably, wouldn't it?
Very much so. In fact, some research was done, I think it was by the University College London 10 years ago or something, I can't remember exactly. And they were able to show the extent of grade inflation. So somebody that got a grade C, okay, would now get a grade A for that grade C.
A C would be an A?
A C would be an A, yeah.
God almighty.
Yeah.
So the thing about our universities are, if you look at the worldwide league tables, we still do actually have some of our top universities. We're way overrepresented in the world top 100, for example. So some of our universities are clearly doing a good job still.
Some of our universities are the best in the world. There's absolutely no question about that. Okay, what the problem is, Eddie, is the rise of the new universities. You're talking about the sort of Russell Group, the old universities. We've got a proliferation of new universities now that started in 1992 when the government turned the polytechnics into universities, and since then we've had a growth of universities. And so you can go to the University of East London now if you want, you know. Yeah. And it's these universities where we're having the problems. It's these universities who are desperate for income flows and are desperate for students, and that puts pressure on the administration within those universities to lower the academic standards. Because if they maintained the old academic standards, they'd have no students, or very few. So you've got an incentivised dumbing down process that's going on at the moment within higher education, and it's tragic.
Which makes having a degree somewhat worthless, doesn't it? Which means that you have graduates not doing graduate level jobs,
right?
Because they're not, and a lot of them. This is another issue. One of my big things is that we train a workforce, a technical, high skilled workforce, to create a high skill economy. But most of the degrees that we have people graduating with are not suitable for that sort of high skill, high tech economy, are they?
No, that's a really good point. I mean, when the Labour Party introduced its widening participation agenda, the idea was that lots and lots of students would go to university and be prepared for the knowledge economy, the service economy, because, as you know, we were kind of going through a deindustrialisation process. But what he didn't anticipate was that those students would be studying subjects that were not required by the business class in this country. So you get sports science, social work, psychology, lots of humanities degrees. Business people are not interested in those particular subjects. I suppose it's good from the point of self-actualisation of individual students, but in terms of meeting the business demands and the skills demands of the economy, it's been a disaster. And a lot of these students are leaving university with huge debt, Eddie, huge debt, and they end up working in Burger King. I mean, that's not an exaggeration. Yeah. You know, I've seen it.
Well, one of the problems with that is if they don't earn enough money, which they won't if they're working in Burger King, they'll never repay their debt anyway.
Eddie, half the student loan debt never gets repaid. It gets written off, so taxpayers are being fleeced.
Yeah, and when the first round of those comes in, there's going to be a big hole in public finances, but. Yeah. Because there'll be sort of big defaults.
But can I just say another point, Eddie? The problem is that when they closed the polytechnics down in 1992 and they expanded, higher education, they were preparing students for the knowledge economy and for the service economy, and the whole emphasis was on transferable skills, what we call transferable skills, but they absolutely neglected technical education. And so now we have...
That was sort of what the polytechnics were set up for, though,
That's what they were set up for. So now we've got huge skill shortages in our economy. And that's why you have these huge immigration flows. When they talk about we need the best and the brightest to come into our country. Well, actually, if we had proper institutions to train our own people, we'd produce our own best and brightest.
Well, one of the consequences of the producing a workforce or a graduate workforce in the social sciences or the arts is that if you're an entrepreneur and you want to invest in a business, you have to have the workforce to do that business.
Yeah.
So if you haven't got a large pool of trained technical people, scientists, engineers and so forth, an entrepreneur isn't going to start up a business in that way for a productive, high-tech, high-skilled business because he hasn't got the workforce to do it with.
Absolutely right.
And so it pushes entrepreneurs into opening up coffee shops or businesses of that nature on the service sector.
Very good point.
And it becomes a circular situation where one thing feeds into the other.
Yeah. But we've really our economy's become structurally dependent on foreign labour. And that's tragic, because what we're doing is we're taking the best and the brightest away from countries who need those people. Resources, human resources are needed by those countries who have paid for those people's education, and we're kind of creaming them off, and at the same time closing down opportunities for our own people to be able to come through those institutions with the right type of training and get those jobs that we need them getting.
But the theme of the 3 talks I've had with you, in a way, is that the whole educational system from the bottom up is based on a sort of egalitarian dream and an anti-elitism.
Yeah.
And it's only, I think, through cherishing elitism, encouraging elitism and excellence that we're ever going to get anywhere as a country, and to encourage it in our people to strive for to better themselves, to make themselves as best as they possibly can.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that the whole pursuit of egalitarianism and equality as a sort of underpinning philosophy of the education system has done a great deal of damage. And it's done damage to our economy and damage to individual students in terms of their self-esteem. Because, you know, the philosophy is that you can achieve whatever you want to achieve, and if you work hard enough, you can get to where you want to be. Now, I think we should encourage students to work hard and have aspirations, but this idea that everybody can be a doctor or a solicitor or an accountant is absurd. They can't. And we have to be realistic about that, and we have to think about what a student's talents are and what their abilities are, and then try and bring out those talents and those abilities. But those talents and abilities may not be as good as the talents and abilities of another student. So that's the problem. And if I could just say, it's also the quest for equality and egalitarianism has fundamentally been at the heart of the dumbing down of our education system. Grade inflation, less robust academic qualifications, and so it's done a lot of damage, in my view. And
this is one other aspect which we haven't actually really touched upon, which we will do quickly to wrap up.
Sure.
Which is, there's one group, of course, in society who hasn't been encouraged to strive for excellence, which has almost been totally neglected, totally ignored and treated with contempt, and that's the white working class kids, boys, white working class boys
in particular. Yes, yeah.
And I know you have some views on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the white working class have really been left behind. With the sort of deindustrialisation that took place in the 70s and 80s and going into the 90s, all the jobs that were available for the white working class in the coastal towns and in the industrial areas, all those jobs were shipped off abroad, manufacturers, and they were all outsourced. And the idea was that, you know, these kids could then go on to university. They didn't need the manufacturing industry. They could go to university and join the professions. Well, of course, you know, that's not what happened. A lot of these kids have just been stuck in areas of high socioeconomic deprivation. The jobs are not there for them. They're not the kids that want to go to university. And what their dads did, and their granddads, is they defined their masculinity, if you like, through hard physical labour, through hard work, bringing home a salary or a wage at the end of the week and looking after their family. And that gave them a sense of self-esteem, and it gave them some meaning and purpose in life.
And being taught to be proud of their country.
And being taught to be proud of their country. And the thing is that those communities now in which that working class pride was established have been destroyed. Okay, so these kids really, you know, they don't have a voice, and of course, in the schools, their issues have not been addressed because they're not part of an identity group. They're not black. They're not female.
A trendy identity.
They're not gay, right? So what happens is that the multicultural curriculum sets out to meet the needs of all these marginal groups, these identity groups, but the working class are not included in that because they're seen as being part of the oppressor class. And so their civilizational heritage has been trashed. You know, their cultural identity has been trashed. At the same time, immigrant communities have their identities promoted and celebrated. And working class kids these days, they have no idea of who they are. These, particularly those on free school meals in the poor areas of our country, they have no identity. They have no sense of place. They have not a culture to be proud of, because it's often trashed, within the school lessons. So these kids have been marginalised in terms of jobs. They're on benefits mainly, or their parents are on benefits. There's no work for them, and what little work there is for them, Eddie, they have to compete with immigrants, right? Particularly Eastern Europeans. When they go to school, they're told that they're racist and that they're sexist, and that their country's responsible for all sorts of evils. And so we've done a lot of damage to these kids, and they've been left behind. And it's about time their needs were met and addressed. I mean, the white working class, the underclass now, and we're only talking about a sort of underclass here, they're the worst competitors with every other group, right? Every other group now outcompetes this particular group. And they've just been ignored because they don't fit into the identity politics agenda, Eddie.
Well, these talks have shown that there's an awful lot to do, and there's a whole list of wrongs that need to be righted, and education is a vital subject. Well, thank you very much for this for these talks.
You're very welcome, Eddie. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I say, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you.